As well as using active study strategies, there are other things that you can do to make sure you are making the most of your study time. One of those things is called spaced practice. This is where you study the key points in short bursts over a long period of time. So this means you revise a topic multiple times, but only for short periods at a time, and ideally in different ways. And you space your study out over a couple of months. For example, you could start by actively studying the content a day after learning it in class. So this could involve going through your notes, highlighting the key points, working out what the main takeaways from that lesson were, and then turning those into cue cards. You would then come back 1 week later and study it again, so you could use those cue cards to test yourself. You would then come back 1 month after that and study the same content. So this time you could complete a practice question from a previous year's exam. Another month later, or a couple of months later, you could come back and study the content again. So this time you could create a mind map of the topic to get a clear idea of how much you still know and your understanding of the topic. There isn't a set schedule of when to study, so it is something that you will have to trial. If you find you remember the information very easily, you can increase the length of time between your study sessions. But if you're really struggling to recall any information in your next study session, you will need to make your study sessions closer together. So the idea of studying the same thing multiple times can seem a little bit overwhelming when you consider that you have 6 subjects. The things to remember are that you're studying for a short period of time. So it may take you 10 minutes to go over your notes and work out what the key points are, and then another 10 minutes to turn those key points into cue cards. So you're not studying for an hour for each subject, for example. It's short periods. You can also block your information too. So that means you don't have to revise every single lesson individually. For some subjects, you will be covering a certain topic for a week in class. So you would group these lessons together and use the spacing technique to revise the key points from the whole week's worth of lessons in one go. So for spacing your study to work, you need to make a plan of what you will study and when. Otherwise, you are going to lose track of what you need to revise. So the Ultimate Study Planner is a free resource that can help you with this, and I've linked it in the text, or you may see it below. So by dedicating shorter periods of time to regularly revising the content, you are continuously strengthening the pathways for recalling information, and you're telling your brain that the information is important and needs to be kept in your long-term memory. So the reason spaced practice works so well is because your brain is actively working to forget things. So sure, you can store unlimited amounts of information in your long-term memory, but this would make life difficult for you. Think of your long-term memory like your wardrobe. So you've purchased lots of clothes over the years and stored them in your wardrobe. Over time, the clothes in your wardrobe become so packed in you can barely move the coat hangers enough to see what clothes are in there. And sure, you could go out and buy a set of drawers, but then you have to remember where you put your blue jeans after the last time you wore them. And with too many possible places they could be stored, it would become a nightmare. You are not going to make your mornings harder just so you can hold on to the clothes you wore when you were 9. Instead, you go through your wardrobe and decide what clothes you can get rid of. So you would most likely keep the clothes you wear often, but you would get rid of anything you haven't worn in a few years. You would also get rid of that jersey with the big fluffy cat on it that someone gave you as a gift. You may have worn it once on the day they gave it to you, but then you stuffed it in your wardrobe. When you find it again, you know you haven't used it in ages and are unlikely to do so in the future, and so you get rid of it. Your brain does the exact same thing in your long-term memory. It is constantly evaluating the information that's stored in there, thinking about what pathways it needs to keep and which it can shut down to make it easier for you to recall the important information. So any information you have revised and used only once will be seen as not important, and the pathways for recalling that information will be turned off. So most students who study leave it until the week before the exam and then they cram. And they end up believing that cramming works because in the exam they can remember some of what they crammed. But what they don't think about is how much content they forgot. So our brain cannot learn huge amounts of information in one go. We become distracted and fatigued over time, and so our study becomes less effective. Also, our brains cannot process huge amounts of information, so it will store some of what we learn and ignore others. And we'll talk a little bit more about this in the next study tip. So unfortunately, there is also a bigger picture. You may be able to get some information into your long-term memory by cramming, and if you use active study strategies, you will be able to recall that information a few days later. However, because you are only using the information for a short period of time, while cramming and a few days later in the test, your brain will soon forget it. If you do take the same subject the following year, you will have forgotten almost everything. This makes the next level so much harder as you have to learn all of the new content plus everything you forgot from the year before. By spacing out your study, you are frequently using the information and you're encouraging your brain to keep it stored and active in your long-term memory. So you will be able to recall the information the following year and build upon it with your new learning. Next study tip is to take breaks whilst you're studying. So don't study for long periods of time all at once. This is because for the information that we have encoded or learnt to be stored in our long-term memory, our brain must make connections between what we have just learnt and what we already know. And this process happens best when we are resting. So the connections form when we aren't even thinking about the information. And so you may have studied before or tried to complete an assignment, but struggled to understand the information or to get the right wording for your assignment. But then later when you're doing something else, the wording pops into your head or the concept you were struggling with suddenly makes sense. And this is because your brain has been forming those connections as it moves what you have learnt to your long-term memory. And these sudden breakthroughs are actually called shower thoughts because they quite often happen in the shower when someone is completely relaxed. So studying for long periods of time without a break is less effective because your brain does not have time to form the connections needed to store the information in your long-term memory. So you are better to study for 30 to 45 minutes tops and then do something that relaxes you. Even better, take a nap. Research has actually found that napping after studying helps store the information in your long-term memory better. Another important point is to make sure you get enough sleep, especially the night before your exam. So not only is sleep needed to make those strong connections between your new and prior learning, but a lack of sleep makes it more difficult for your brain to retrieve information stored in your long-term memory. The worst thing you can do is stay up studying the night before an exam. If you leave studying until the last day and you're desperately trying to cram a year's worth of work into your brain, you are better to stop at 9:30 and get a good night's sleep. This will help your brain store the information you have learnt that day and improve your chances of recalling it the next day in the exam. So finally, if you find it really hard to stay motivated with your study, make a plan for what you will learn each week and decide on a reward if you achieve this. For example, there may be something you really want to go to on the weekend, and your reward could be that you get to go, but only if you complete a practice NCEA paper for 3 of your subjects during the week. So if you do find it hard to motivate yourself, setting rewards can really help. And this is because the brain releases a substance called dopamine when we get a reward. And this leaves us feeling really good. And so it encourages us to repeat the same behavior because we are expecting another reward to come from doing that same behavior, and that would then therefore make us feel good again. And so we can use this to actually form study habits. If you want help setting up a study plan, you can try the Ultimate Study Planner workshop. So this is a free workshop that will help you plan what you need to study for each of your subjects and create a realistic study timetable that you can actually stick to. And there are spaces for you to include how long you will study each concept or idea for, how you will study it, and also what the reward will be if you stick to your plan and you actually get it done.